discussion and debate, atheism, evolution, Bible study, prophecy and doctrine, social issues, and everything Christian. These are Hot Topics with your host Eric, aka Wolf. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining in. This is Eric, aka Wolf Bitten. This is Hot Topics, and with me today is a special guest. Her name is Kirsten. I believe she's an atheist, and we're going to be having just an open discussion today. So, welcome, Kirsten. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Tomorrow, let me just give this a little bit a heads up for everybody. I'm going to have a special friend on tomorrow. This is a fellow who I believe is a non-Christian, but he's a very interesting fellow. One of my favorite friends. His name is Ray Bay, and I think you're going to find he has very interesting points of view. I'm really looking forward to that. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we have what I consider to be probably the most underrated and underread books of the Bible, Zechariah. And it's so fitting for today. It's rich in eschatological resources from beginning to end. And I think you're going to be amazed at this little book. But Kirsten, welcome. Thank you very much. And I would like for you to take a minute, if you would, and just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Kirsten, and as you can hear, I've got a different accent, so I'm from New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand. I am engaged to my partner, Jordan. I don't know. Like Eric said, I am an atheist. New Zealand is quite an atheist country. I think there's more of an atheist population than there is a religious population. I'm just here to kind of learn a few things because I know nothing about creation or the Bible or anything like that. So I'm quite interested to see, the other half and what other people's beliefs and kind of the evidence towards that. I mean, I just like learning new things. So yeah.
Well, that's interesting, and I'm glad to have you aboard. And I look forward to addressing anything that you have to ask. So I noticed we met, you and I met through, I guess we could say, mutual friends, although not mutual friends. I was asked to debate somebody that was a part of a group that you're with, and through setting up a debate for these folks, you and I eventually met. So how did you come to be with this group that calls themselves Nemesis, if you don't mind me asking?
So basically my fiance, Jordan, he's studying science and he's going for his master's in microbiology. And so we're quite science-based, and we ended up joining some flat earth groups and found that, quite interesting, and then kind of anti-vax groups and other groups, and then we just kind of started talking to people in Nemesis, and it just kind of went from there.
That's cool. So you are interested in science?
Yes, love science.
And this is what brought you to Nemesis. And I'll tell you why I find that interesting, because through my debate, now I imagine your Jordan is not the same Jordan that's come on this program a time or two, is he?
Not Jordan Sweet, no.
Okay. I didn't think so. So the interesting thing about this is I love science too. And that's one reason. It's not the reason I'm Christian. The reason I'm Christian for personal reasons. Let me try to explain my position to you. I was one of those people that was brought up in a Christian home, but that's not even why I'm Christian. I'm Christian because from the time I was a small child, God himself has proven himself to me. that's why I'm Christian. I'm Christian for a number of personal reasons, although I do love science. One thing that I like to debate, as a matter of fact, is evolution. And I'll explain my position on evolution so you know where I'd stand. But when I first started studying this, it wouldn't have hurt me. It wouldn't have hurt my faith at all if I were to have found that evolution were true. Wouldn't have hurt me a bit, because as a believer in God, if you really believe in an almighty God, then you believe God's able to do anything any way he wanted to. So he was certainly able to use something like evolution to bring about all the various life forms we have today. So that's where I stood, and I just wanted to see where evolution itself stood scientifically. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay, so I began looking into it, and I discovered two things. That one, there's a big difference between hype and fact. There's a big difference between claims and the actual evidence that these claims are based on. You understand what I'm saying there, I'm sure.
Yes.
So I began to see that there was a big divide between some of the claims that were made and the evidence that it was based on. But we can go into that later. What kind of questions would you have for me if you wanted to satisfy your thirst for knowledge in this area?
For starters, like, what is creation? Like, I really just don't know anything about it. Like, what is creation?
Okay, that's a very good question, very interesting question. Creation is the idea that all of this came from somewhere.
Yeah.
And that you can't have a building without a builder. You can't have a creation without a creator. You can't have life without a life giver, for instance. So I think if we take an honest look at the question that we have before us, I think it would boil down to this. Which existed first? Did the universe exist first? And did it just create life? Was there something that created? Was there something that just expanded from basically nothing and for basically no cause? And this is something that we don't understand, if we look at it from a purely scientific point of view. And did that from there go on to create life, consciousness, and intelligence? Or was there an intelligence, a life, a consciousness that's unseen, pervading all the, everywhere that you could possibly call a universe, or every place that the universe would eventually take up? Was there a consciousness first who created all this? Now, the creationist, of course, would say yes. The non-creationist would say that the universe itself, or that first particle, was the creator.
Yeah.
So either way you look at it, there's going to be a creator. It either started off with something, with an invisible, all-pervading life and energy, or it began with a particle. As far as I'm concerned, have you heard of the science called biogenesis?
Yes.
Okay. Biogenesis is a really interesting science. Have you looked into it at all? Are you familiar with it?
I mean, I don't know as much as Jordan would, because that's more kind of like his expertise. But I mean,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I admit that.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
yeah.
No, that's no problem. Biogenesis. I've got a couple things here I can show you. I pulled these up before I before we joined in this evening because I figured you would want to go here. Biogenesis is an actual science. Some people believe it was perfected by Louis Pasteur, and it's always been in competition with what we would call today abiogenesis, what was once known as spontaneous generation. Now, spontaneous generation and abiogenesis, abiogenesis is a more refined view of spontaneous generation. Spontaneous generation believed that, like you see microbes begin to form on rancid meat and maggots form, and back then people didn't understand how this happened, and they attributed it to spontaneous generation and assumed that this was how life started on Earth.
Yeah.
Louis Pasteur negated that. He falsified it and showed that, these were things that just naturally happened to rancid meat and etc. So, but still, the theory of abiogenesis is competing with the theory of biogenesis. I'll go on to the next one here. Biogenesis, I think you would agree with me that all science, all good science, should begin with observation, right? You make observations, you think about what you're observing, and you try to come up with the best explanations.
Yeah, it's part of the process of science. Yeah.
Exactly. So, observation is the beginning of that process. And like here, for instance, they use spider eggs as an example. All life comes from a previous life. It doesn't matter what life we point to. It can be bacterial, it can be animal, it can be insect. It doesn't matter which kingdom it belongs to, which phylum. It doesn't matter what life you point to. The one thing that we note is that life does not just randomly form and all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, just pop to life. And yet that's what abiogenesis postulates. So I've seen all kinds of panel discussions and lectures on abiogenesis that included people like Craig Venter, the world's foremost geneticist, and Richard Dawkins, and people of his ilk. And I can show you on these panel discussions, they don't have the slightest idea how any of this happened. Not only can we pile all of these building blocks to life up, we know what they are. We can put them all together. We can irradiate them, strike them with lightning. We can do anything you want to do to them, but they just lay there. They don't just pop to life.
So like, according to kind of like the creation theory, how did people come to be on the earth?
Well, according to creation, Christian creation, okay, because creation, depending on the religion, is a little bit different, going from religion to religion, but it's very similar. The one thing that all religions pretty much have in common, all of the ancient religions, is that there was a God who created life on earth and created mankind. And this God, when he began creating, we see, like in Genesis, first of all, that he created the heavens and the earth. Now, I'm not your typical creationist that believes Genesis chapter 1 is a 6-day creation. I'm a little bit different because I understand this from the Hebrew. And when you read this from the Hebrew, Genesis chapter 1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But in verse 2, it says, and the earth became laid waste and destroyed, decimated, emptied, devoid of life. And on Isaiah, it says, I haven't created this world emptied and laid to waste. I created it living, full of life. So what we actually see in the creationist, from the creationist point of view, if you take it strictly literally from the Hebrew, God created the earth, he created life, and then there was an extinction event. And then from let there be light on, you have the restoration of life on earth and the healing of the earth, the healing of the atmosphere, the healing of the earth, and the restoration of life on earth. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 says, one generation comes and another generation goes, but the earth abides forever. You could use generation as in cycles of life. It's used interchangeably. They're the same sort of meaning. Then when you go to Revelation, you have two more extinction events, and then the restoration of life on earth again in the book of Revelation. These are coming extinction events. So the way I see it, this earth has seen at least a couple extinction events, and we'll see at least a couple more. And who knows how far back that goes. It may go back for hundreds of millions or billions of years. I have no way of knowing. It doesn't tell us. And I try to only be dogmatic where God is dogmatic. Those are the only things I can say for sure.
Yeah, I see that Dick Stain said that there are different, like, people interpret it differently.
Now, what
Is
was
that right? Dick Stain said that it's like your interpretation. Your interpretation. Are there different interpretations of the Bible? Like, do people just interpret it?
Well, you see, there are most creationists just understand the Bible from the English translations. And, so when you understand it from if you're going to translate any large major body of work, let's say Moby Dick, if you were going to translate that into German or Norwegian or another language, there are words that are used that just do not translate well.
Okay.
And so you always have that problem. And then now, when people look at the one criticism that I've heard, and as far as I'm concerned, it's an honest criticism, but it's not based on full knowledge. I've heard that the Bible has been rewritten. The manuscripts have been messed up so bad down through time that you can't really trust it.
Yes, that's one thing. I don't know if this is correct, but one thing I heard is the people that wrote in the Bible didn't actually meet Jesus or anything like that. Is that correct?
Well, no, that wouldn't be correct. First of all, you do have the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Now, the Old Testament was written by people who died before Christ, but most of them, or a large portion of them, foretold the coming Messiah. And they told the story of the family that Christ came from and the fall of man, and etc., through to the New Testament. And then one of the criticisms that are brought about today say that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John didn't write the four Gospels. Now, that criticism has just come about in the last few hundred years. And I'm going to tell you why that's a bad criticism. We have men there's a fellow named Polycarp, for instance, who was one of the leaders of the early church. We have an unbroken succession of people from the time of Christ that have written as Christianity was flourishing and spreading throughout the world. Now, if Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not the authors, there would have been a big stink about this in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries on up, but there wasn't. It was never a question. There was never a doubt. This was a doubt that was raised in the last few hundred years by schools of thought that originated in from the writers of what's called the Talmud. The writers of the Talmud were the same descendants of the same people who crucified the Christ. They were a band of Jews that hated Christianity and has persecuted it since day one by crucifying Christ, and then coming on down through time to continually chase Christians into other nations and try to have them killed and persecuted in other nations. But these were the same people, the Babylonian Talmudists, for example, that came up with the theory that Mark was the first book that was written and that Matthew and Luke copied out of Mark. But it's a totally backward accusation. You can see that Matthew and Mark were originally written first, and that Mark takes portions of Matthew and portions of Luke and butts them together, combines them. So Mark was actually written later. So that whole thing is kind of a ridiculous charge against Christianity that's easily proven wrong.
Okay.
Also, you have the church history. You have Matthew. All right, Jesus would have taught Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they would have written the first Gospels, and they also presided over the early church. Now, John was the teacher to a fellow named Polycarp. He took this young fellow named Polycarp under his wing, a young Christian, and Polycarp knew most of the apostles. And Polycarp learned firsthand from these apostles. And he was there among hundreds of witnesses who all swore that they saw Jesus risen from the dead. There were hundreds of them. Even the Apostle Paul, who came about later, met hundreds of these people that had literally seen the Christ.
Yeah.
So then from Polycarp, you go to Irenaeus, and Irenaeus set and was taught by Polycarp. And from there, you have an unbroken line of succession of all of these early church fathers who have written, and there never, ever, ever was any sort of controversy until the rabbis from the who partook in the Babylonian Talmud and had a horse in the race. They didn't like Christ. They didn't like Christianity. And so they began this criticism that's pretty much really easily proven wrong. But getting back to the manuscripts now, and some of the confusion over the manuscripts, there's really no need to be confused over the manuscripts either, because some of the charges against them, if you just look into it just a little bit, you'll see that it holds no weight.
Yeah.
What we have is we do have some dissenting documents. They are called the Alexandrian Manuscripts, and they're also known as the minority text. Now, they're known as the minority text for a good reason. They're based on two codices, and several fragments. There's a total of 27 in all. Now, these 27, they were originated in a place called Alexandria, Egypt. And I've traced it back to probably either Origen or a student of Origen, who actually said he was a teacher at the School of Alexandria. And he said he actually has thousands of works still existing. In one of his works, he stated that he learned the Hebrew language so he could, quote unquote, improve on the manuscripts. And sure enough, that's where these manuscripts originate. So the Alexandrian manuscripts do change some of these things, but like I said, there's only 27, and that's including fragments. Now, when you compare them to the rest of the manuscripts that existed before, during, and after, you have tens of thousands of manuscripts that agree together. One thing that I don't like some of the claims made about the Alexandrian manuscripts. For instance, they claim to be the earliest and most reliable. Both of those are not true and easily proved wrong. They found both of these codices, the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus, in the trash cans. They were bad copies. They were not used. They were just, I guess you could call them, well, they were just mistranslated. The ink in both of these was long disappeared, and they had been written over clear up into the Middle Ages. And some of the writers, the scribes that were trying to fix them, wrote in the margins that the people that had written in this prior were heretical. They were heretics, and they were presenting a heretical, flawed copies. That's right there in the margin of the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus by one of the scribes that was working on them in the later years. Jerome in the year 400 was being forced by Justinian to use these manuscripts, these Alexandrian manuscripts, to write his version of the Latin Bible around 400 AD, from which the Douay Rheims, the Catholic Bible, comes. And in the foreword to the epistles, he states that he was being forced to use manuscripts that were heretical. They weren't complete, and that they were missing things like the Johannine comma, 1 John 5:7, which says, "And now abides the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, these three are one." That these manuscripts were missing these important portions of Scripture and were heretical, but he was being forced to use them by Justinian. That's right there. Now, if you look at the earliest manuscripts, the earliest that we have are like the Syriac, the early Latin. The Syriac is actually written in Aramaic, and then you have the early Latin. These both predate the Alexandrian manuscripts. The Western manuscripts were in existence at the same time. They are as early as the Alexandrian manuscripts. And then you have the Byzantine, which are written afterward. Now, the interesting thing is that the Syriac, the early Latin, the Byzantine, and the Western manuscripts all agreed together. Now, they're all written in different languages, but the full text is there, and they agree in what's being said. So you have thousands of those compared to the 27 of the minority manuscripts.
So is there like evidence, like kind of sort of these things? Like, I mean, is there like the literal belief that like Noah's Ark and things like that happened, or are they kind of, I mean, that's the kind of thing I know about, like Noah's Ark and the splitting of the sea. I mean, that's as much as I know about the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Did they really happen, or is there evidence they happen? Kind of, you know.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the evidence for these things are really right in front of us. And I'll tell you where they're hidden. They're hidden in things that are proven wrong, and yet they're insisted are true. For instance, let me. One reason that I like to debate evolution, okay, is because I'm attacking more than just evolution. I'm attacking the entire timeline. For instance, it's commonly thought, and I'm sure you would probably agree, that dinosaurs died 65 and 80 million years ago, and 120 million years ago during the Triassic. But you see, here's where people miss it. They're not keeping up with, and this isn't entirely their fault. This is not being publicized the way it should be. But this is one reason I win a lot of my debates. And when I put, like I brought Jordan on, Jordan Sweet. Jordan tried to kick against this every way possible, coming right out and calling me a liar, saying that I didn't have the sources that I claimed to have. And then he cussed me and dropped out of the discussion when I was bringing up those sources. I was going to save those sources for a debate that he had challenged me to on Modern Day Debate, which I don't think he's going to follow up with. But anyway, Mary Schweitzer come up with, we all know the story of Mary Schweitzer. She found soft tissue in dinosaur bones. And in the 1990s, and in 2005, for some reason, it took that long for it to hit the fan. And then after it hit the fan, I guess that's why she didn't want to come out with this, because when it hit the fan, she was under all kinds of ridicule from mainstream science. They were coming right out and calling her a charlatan, saying that she was an absolute lunatic. It was impossible to find soft tissue in dinosaur bones, and that she didn't know the difference between biofilm and soft biological tissue. Now, I imagine the reason she was so slow in coming out with this is because she knew what she was heading into. She knew what was coming. Her boss, as a matter of fact, was a fellow named, oh gosh, it'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, her boss is one of the most famous paleontologists in the world in the last 100 years. And he, as a matter of fact, was the science advisor for the first 3 Jurassic Park movies. He was the fellow that originally came out with the idea of knocking down the thought that T-Rex was abandoned their children and that they actually raised their children. And this was his lab that this soft tissue was found in. But Mary went on to earn her PhD by proving to her critics that this wasn't biofilm, this was indeed soft tissue in these dinosaur bones. Now, the way she did that, she brought other people in and they ran test after test after test, and they kept finding the same thing. They would dissolve the bone and the other matrix, and what they had left were blood vessels. And they had hollow tracts like blood veins, because that's what they were. And in these hollow tracts were red blood cell-like structures. And there was collagen, keratin, all kinds of soft tissues and proteins that were left in this not completely fossilized bone. Now, after running these tests and proving to everybody that this was truly biological tissue, soft tissue, everybody died down. But she still had some criticism coming against her, but she kept facing it head on. She came out with a paper in 2011 that went all the way back to 1909 and brought out time after time after time after time, soft tissue was reported in dinosaur bone that was not completely fossilized. And that this had been going on for decades, over a century. And it's been information, it was information that was hidden from the public. They would not make this public. And it was her paper that originally made it public. And then in 2014, I believe it was, she came out with her final paper. It's not her final paper on the subject, but it had the final word on the fact that these things can be preserved a while anyway. But what she did was she tested the question was, how can we possibly preserve these soft tissues? And the goal would have been to try to make them preserve for 85 million years. That would have been the ultimate goal, but that's not what she reached. See, these things have a half-life. Collagen has a half-life. DNA has a half-life. All of these things have a half-life. Now, after 10 half-lives, you basically have nothing left that you originally started with. That's why, do you know very much about carbon-14 dating?
Yeah, I know a little bit about it, yeah.
Okay. Well, we carbon date things only up to like 55, 60,000 years, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the reason for that, the reason we don't carbon date things that they think are over 55 or 60,000 years old is because at the end of 10 half-lives, you shouldn't have any of it left, basically none of it. You might have tiny traces left, but that's about it after 10 half-lives. Carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years, give or take 40 years. So that means that at the end of 55,000 or 60,000 years tops, you would not have basically any carbon-14 left, and so it does you no good to test it after that point. That's why that's why they don't test anything that they consider older than that with carbon-14. So now, if you look at the half-life of collagen, this is one of the things that they find consistently in dinosaur bones now and horns, and they found it in several. There's several types of collagen. You have the collagen that can be found in vascular tissues. Now, there's a very good chance that that's a type of collagen they actually found, because they found blood vessels and blood cells. So we could probably bet that that's the type of collagen they found, but that's only got a half-life of 60 to 70 days. Now, if you take the half-life of collagen from skin, that's only got a half-life of 15 years. But if you go to the collagen that's found in cartilage, it's protected, and it has a half-life of 117 years. So if you use the longest half-life for collagen that we have a 117-year half-life. Now, 10 half-lives, what's 10 times 117 years? How much time would that give you?
Sorry. Are you there?
Yeah. If you,
sorry, it just cut out a little bit. Sorry about that.
That's okay. If you take collagen 117 years, and you take 10 half-lives, how much time does that give you?
10 half-lives of 117.
10 half-lives at 117 years.
Well, that's just 1170.
Yeah. 1,170 years. That's all you have. Now,
sorry. I was just going to say, Dick Stain in the comments, and something I was wondering as well is like evidence towards God. Like, what evidence do you have that supports God? Like, I know that, with the study that supports your
well, in the first place, somebody asking me or somebody telling me God doesn't exist is kind of like telling me my parents don't exist. I know better because I know God. If I were to tell you that you didn't know your parents, you don't have parents, and you can't prove to me you have parents. If I decided I wasn't going to accept anything that you could give me over the internet here, you couldn't prove to anybody that you have parents. Now, what I am giving you is proof of God. Okay? Because these things prove that what these guys believe is wrong. For instance, these guys believe that dinosaurs died tens of millions of years ago. They can't. Because, you see, the best they can have was given to them by Mary Schweitzer. She increased, I can give you the...
Are you there? You've cut out. I can't hear you at all.
But
can anyone hear me? Oh,
yeah, I can give you I can give you the article in the paper here that shows us that according to Mary's work, the oldest these dinosaur bones can be is 234,000 years old. You yourself just said 10 half-lives of 117 years is only 1,170 years. Now,
Eric, I can't hear you at all. People are saying that you dropped out.
No, I'm here, and they can hear me. So, if you go to Mary's paper that I can pull up here, as a matter of fact, what you're going to see in Mary's paper is that she did a test that allowed a half-life to be extended from...
hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me? Are you there? Can you hear Kirsten?
Eric, I can't hear you at all. Apparently, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Everyone in the chat can hear both of us, but I can't hear you at all.
Okay. If you can
hear me, I will leave and try come back in because I can't hear you at all.
Okay, that's fine. And while Kirsten is gone and I'm waiting for her, you see the difference between Kirsten and the group that she belongs to. Nemesis. While Kirsten is sitting here willing to have a conversation, they're not willing to have this conversation. So let's bring Kirsten back in. Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Sorry about that. You just
That's
completely
okay.
cut out.
That's okay. Welcome back. So
Thank you.
what I was saying though is, Kirsten, you have you yourself mentioned that if you have 10 half-lives of collagen at 117 years, that gives us 1,170 years.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you something here. Bear with me just a moment. I'm going to screen share. This comes from Mary Schweitzer. And this is the paper that she brought out from 2014. And this proves that these bones cannot be millions of years old. This is the best they have. This test was to see how long they can preserve these soft tissues, specifically collagen and etc., that was found in dinosaur bones. Now, right down here, she gives you what they were able to do. And she explains what she did. She's explaining that iron and oxygen from the hemoglobin that was taken from an ostrich, I believe it was an ostrich egg that they used in this particular case, and they were able to preserve blood proteins from 3 days to 2 years. Or if you go down just a little bit more, that is a 200-fold increase. 200-fold increase from 3 days to a little more than 2 years at room temperature.
Is she also Christian?
Yes, she's a
Or
Christian.
Is she? Okay.
But she didn't do this work as a Christian. She did this work as a scientist.
Oh no, I'm just.
Okay.
It was just a curious question because I think in one of your other videos you said that she was a young Earth creationist or something.
I don't
know what the difference.
Yeah, I don't believe
I don't know what the difference between both. But
I don't believe she's a young Earth creationist now.
What is a young Earth creationist?
Somebody that believes the Earth was created in 6 days.
Oh, okay. So, like you were saying at the beginning, that they believed in that.
Yeah.
And is that from the same Bible that you kind of interpret from, or is it a different?
Well, it's not that I'm interpreting. They're believing. They're getting their information from the English translation. Yeah. I'm getting my information from the original Hebrew Chaldean that it was written in. So,
and is everyone like? I mean, I know that the different people do interpret it differently. Is everyone still kind of right? Is it all the same God? Kind of. That makes sense.
Yeah, of course we believe in the same God and the same Jesus Christ. Yes, exactly. But the importance of this paper here is that nobody can show you, nobody in any paper can show you where these proteins have been tested and proven to have been preserved more than 200-fold. According to Mary's tests, and hers are the only tests that give us this long of an increase in stability. She was able to take something that would normally be gone in like 3 days and preserve it for 2 years at room temperature. That's a 200-fold increase. So if you take the half-life of collagen 117 years, and you multiply it by 10 half-lives, you've got 1,170 years. And then you multiply that 200-fold, what do you have?
Oh, oh, hold on. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Take your time.
So, am I doing the math now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's simple enough. If you have 117 years and 10 half-lives, that's 1,170 years, right? 1,170. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now multiply 1,170 years 200-fold, and you get 234,000 years. That's the oldest these bones can be, according to every single test that's ever been run. Nobody has ever given us more than a 200-fold increase. Nobody. So you don't have millions of years. Now there's more. Okay. I can show you other papers here.
You said, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, her boss's name was Jack Horner, who is probably the foremost paleontologist of the last 100 years. And that's why she had to be very, very careful, because she was working for the most prestigious paleontologist of the last 100 years, Jack Horner. Now, she earned her PhD proving all of this. And now this is accepted. But the problem is people aren't doing the math, and you really need to do the math. But there's more. We have also...
It'd be good to see the other papers to support this as well. What else have you got? Like, what other research and papers have you got?
Yeah. Well, we have this right here that I'm also sharing. Radiocarbon in dinosaur fossils compatible with an age of millions of years, they say. But, you see, here's the problem. I want to tell you why this paper was written. This paper was written in response to the fact that score is 20, and scores of dinosaur bones and samples and horns were tested with carbon-14. And none of them should have come back positive for carbon-14. None of them should have. But every single one did. Not missing one. Every single one came back between 9,000 and 40,000 years old. Now, this paper was written to try to debunk that fact. But you can't debunk the fact because it's true, okay? That's why they wrote this paper, because all of these dinosaur bone samples that were sent off, every single one came back young. And what he's saying is, this guy is willing to sabotage the entire dating system. And he says, look, every single one was contaminated. You can't trust. Carbon-14 is going to contaminate every single thing that you ever try to test. And so he's saying you can't trust radiometric dating at all, because it's going to be leaching stuff in and out the entire time, and you can't trust any of it. That's what they're saying. That's what they're doing here with this paper, trying to cover for the fact that all of these bones are coming up C14 rich. Now, right here, too, I want to show you something else. We have Jack Horner. Now, Jack Horner, like I told you, is the world's foremost paleontologist of the last 100 years or so. And Jack
Eric,
Horner...
I can't see the one you're sharing. I can just see the Google search. You might need to put, minimize the Google search to put the paper up.
Okay, let me. Thank you for that.
No, that's all right. I'm just interested to see the paper you're sharing.
Pull that back up. Give me just a moment. Yeah, well, this is an actual video that you can pull up. This is a conversation with Jack Horner. And this conversation with Jack Horner is being, this is a fellow named Bob Enright, a talk show host, and he contacted Jack Horner in his laboratory and offered Jack Horner.
Sorry, it's still on the Google search. I can't see it. Sorry, all I can see is the Google search, not what you're trying to.
Okay, bear with me just a moment here.
No, that's all right. Could you maybe minimize the Google search and then bring up the other one?
Well, I just have to stop the screen share, which I just did, and pull this up. Okay. It might be lagging behind a little bit, but it should come up in a second here. And I can put this video in the description so you can look at it for yourself. But in this particular video, Bob Enright is talking to Jack Horner, who is Mary Schweitzer's boss. And he offers Mr. Horner $20,000 plus the cost of a C14 test if he would send a sample of that the T-Rex or the hadrosaur, because Mary Schweitzer found soft tissue in both of them, a T-Rex leg bone and a hadrosaur bone. He offered him $20,000 plus the cost of the C14 test if he would send them off to have them tested. Now, Jack Horner wouldn't do it. And the excuse that he gives is because, quote unquote, the spin that the Christians would get off of the results of this test wouldn't do anybody any favors. In other words, he's admitting ahead of time that we're going to find C14 in the leg bone of that T-Rex and that hadrosaur, and he knows it.
So that him saying that's in the video.
That's in this video. That he makes that statement in this video. So, plus we have the paper that I just showed, where this paper was written. The paper that's coming up right now. This paper was written in response to the scores and scores of dinosaur bones samples that have every single one tested positive for C14. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because here you have two different lines of science that say your line of tens of millions of years is simply wrong. You can't prove these bones are tens of millions of years old. You can't prove it. All of the tests that we have before us right now prove that these bones are less than 100,000 years old. Now, if you take the C14 test, for instance, that test between 10 and 40,000 years, and you look in the last 40,000 years, any timeline where we could possibly have a world flood, and this takes us back to the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas lasted like 12,500 years ago. So the Younger Dryas, we have proof of a worldwide flood. Every single fossil
Is
bed.
that the ark kind of story?
Yeah. You see, every single fossil bed is proof of this. Do you know how big the Morrison Formation is, for instance?
I mean, I've not seen it personally, but
Okay. Have you heard of the Morrison Formation?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the Morrison Formation is one of the large sites in the United States and Canada. It takes up, if you count the 2 provinces of Canada that exists in, it goes down through those 2 provinces and 14 states in the United States. So you could say it takes up 16 states. That's one huge floodplain. Okay. That's just one. Now,
so did the whole world flood? Is that the story?
Well, yeah. But now, if you look at the evidence, you have to say, yes, it did. Because you don't just have this one floodplain in the United States. There's several more floodplains, like in the East, and then down in Central America and South America. You have these gigantic floodplains all over the world that supposedly came about from the same catastrophes.
How did the world repopulate, and how did all the animals kind of, because he couldn't have taken every single species of animal, because I just think that's quite physically impossible. How did that work?
How did what work now?
How did it work? So obviously he built a boat.
Well, let me give you the evidence first. Okay. The evidence first is this. We have all of these fossil records all over the earth that supposedly came from the Mesozoic era. Now, do you know what the Mesozoic is?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, the Mesozoic era takes up 3 time periods: the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay. So now, supposedly, we had a disaster that killed off the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And this is supposedly an asteroid, okay, that struck, they assume, in the Yucatan Peninsula, and it sent debris up into the air that clouded out the atmosphere to the point that photosynthesis couldn't be completed anymore. So it killed off all the plants on the earth. At the same time, you had massive amount of volcanic eruptions going on, clouding the atmosphere. And so what dinosaurs were not initially killed from the blasts and this following tsunamis were killed off through starvation. And that was the massive die-off. Now, we know that this die-off happened, but when did it happen? That's the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of people in the chat are wanting, they're asking questions, and they just messaged and asked if you could please answer some of their questions.
Ask what now?
The people in the chat on YouTube, they've asked some questions. They just messaged saying that they've asked some questions that they would really like you to answer.
I don't know what they're asking.
Hold on.
Well, anyway, this is between you and I. You see, as far as I'm concerned, there's a difference between you and Nemesis. You say you like science. I don't see anybody in Nemesis that knows the first thing about science. I'll tell you what I see. I'll tell you what I see from Nemesis.
Yep, go for it.
Okay. Look at the chat. Look at the name of the chat that they started and included me in. What is the name of that chat?
I can't remember. They didn't create that chat.
Well, of course they did. They keep renaming it too after me. But
no, you can rename the chat. The chat was actually made
that's
by
right.
The people in Do You Even Science for, I think.
But they're not in that anymore, and it's taken over by Nemesis, and Nemesis is the one that keeps naming it after me, which is fine. I don't care. But you see the caliber of people that they are. These are people that don't know the first thing about science, which is, and can't have a civil conversation, which is why I brought you on, because I see you as a different person. You see the type of conversation they have in that chat. You see the accusations, you see the things they say about me in that chat. The only thing I've ever said about them is that when they come on, they don't know the first thing about science, and they claim to be defenders of science. And I see you as a different person. I don't see you as their caliber of person. I'm quite surprised that you would even associate with a gang like that, to be honest with you.
I guess it's because people in there are extremely intelligent, and I think what you're not
That's
getting
the
is
furthest thing from reality that you could have possibly said. They are not intelligent. They didn't know, like Jordan, for instance, hasn't known the first thing about anything we have ever talked about.
He isn't a Nemesis.
When I brought oh yes he is. When I brought him on.
No, he's not. He's not a Nemesis.
If you run with them and you hang with them and you do what they do, you are. So that's that. But and he does all of that. So the point is, everything he tried to argue with me when he came on impersonating a Brit, because he was for some reason afraid to come on himself and just try to have a civil conversation, he talked for 40 minutes without being muted. And everything he said was proven wrong. Everything. He didn't know that biological materials, for instance, have a half-life. There were a lot of things he didn't know. Now, what I'm showing you, though, is scientific calls to understand that the Bible is not far-fetched and that there has to be a creator. Science points to a creator. But
I'm not saying it's far-fetched at all. Like, to me, I believe, or I go with the evidence. So, like, the proof, the evidence, like, I like when things are backed up. Do you know what I mean? Like, there needs to be evidence towards something for me to believe.
Yeah, what I would challenge you with, Kirsten, is to take what I'm giving you and see for yourself whether or not it's true. Okay? So, for instance, see if you can find a paper that gives you more than a 200-fold increase in these biological materials and their preservation. You won't be able to. And the most that gives you is 234,000 years when you're considering the half-life. 117 year, and I'm taking the longest half-life on collagen that I could find. I'm not going. How
old do you think the Earth is?
I have no idea. It could be very, very old.
So you're with the fact that dinosaurs weren't that old, therefore evolution doesn't exist.
I'm just saying.
You think Earth has been around for a long time? I'm just trying to understand.
To put it in a nutshell, I believe that we have a very old Earth, but we live in a rather young age. I think that the dinosaurs, for instance, were wiped out about 12,500 years ago. Now the reason
how do you think because you were unsure about the whole asteroid kind of thing. So
no, that's not what I said at all.
Oh, okay. So you think that did happen?
I'm going by science. Okay.
Okay.
For instance, what happened to wipe out the dinosaur? Well, we have several theories. Some people think that they were wiped out by an asteroid. Some people believe that they were wiped out by volcanic activity. And some people believe that they were wiped out by tsunamis. And there's evidence for all three. I think all three are true. I think that what they say is that during this time, the time that the dinosaur lived, Earth was in a state called Pangaea. Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay, that means that it was one single continent.
Oh, yes.
During the beginning of the Mesozoic age. One single continent. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, they do that. They say that because of the dispersion of the various types of dinosaurs across the Earth. It appears that the Earth was one continent. Now, but they try to date this as being millions and tens of millions of years ago. Now, I'm going to tell you what they base that on. They shop for dates. For instance, in order to, they can't be using, they're not going to use C14 because they're assuming that this world is, or that these dinosaurs are encased in rock that are much older than that. So what do? They assume ages. You have to assume an age before you choose the isotope that you're going to use to test the age of a rock. For instance, with potassium argon, you have to assume that the rock you're going to test is at least 600,000 years old. Because they say it doesn't work right, and if your rock is under 600,000 years old, because you've got at least that much room for error, 600,000 years. Now, with uranium lead, they say that with uranium lead, you have to assume that your rock is at least 10 million years old before you use uranium lead isotope to test the age of a rock. So you see, there's a built-in bias right off the bat by choosing to use either one of these isotopes and refusing to use C14. Now, when you do use C14 on the biological materials found in those rocks, and every single time it comes up that this is young, this isn't tens of millions of years old, but it's under 40,000 years old, then you've got something conflicting going on here, and you're finding C14 everywhere you shouldn't. And so
when do you think dinosaurs first came about? Like, how did they get on the Earth, and when did they exist on Earth, and how did they exist on Earth?
I think that when is something I don't know. When did they come on this Earth? When were they wiped out? Science tells us. Science tells us that they were wiped out under 250,000 years ago. There's several lines of science that tell us this. Okay. So.
Oh, hold on. I'm just, Dick Stain's going. So have a good night, Dick Stain. Thank you for coming. I think she's got to go.
Yeah. So for instance, okay, if you have like Mary giving us this test right here, which is the longest preservation we have on record. And she, according to her math, these bones cannot be over 234,000 years old. That's according to, and that's choosing not the vascular collagen with a half-life of just 30 to 60 days, but the 117-year half-life. That's not the scan collagen of 15 years half-life. That's using the longest 117-year. I'm being as fair as I can be, and using the longest figures that I can possibly use to give them the oldest age I can possibly give them. And even using the oldest, the longest, it only comes to 234,000 years. You did the math yourself.
Yeah, so that's like the dinosaur with the bones that she found.
Right, right. But that's the
there
thing.
Would be
that's the thing.
Before that, right?
That's the thing, though. We don't know that. If the bones were found in rock that they swear is tens of millions of years old, and it can't possibly be if the bones are only 234,000 years. And if
what I'm trying to say is not so much, I'm not discrediting, her work and her research, but what about the fact that there will be dinosaurs before
Well,
that T-Rex ever existed on this earth? Do you know what I mean? Like,
we know that we don't know how long they might have lived before the flood, but we do know that the flood couldn't have happened millions of years ago, and we do know that this was a worldwide flood.
oh, you're basing it on the flood. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
sorry, I'm just still trying to, because obviously, like, these are just kind of stories that I've heard. I don't know much about them.
well, I do want
yeah.
you to understand the physical evidence for it, though, because I don't want you to think I'm just pulling that out of the air.
And I know you're not pulling it out of the air.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is why I kind of wanted to have this discussion, because, like, I've heard things like Noah's Ark and the splitting of the sea.
Sure.
Things that I've heard. I don't know much about, and I don't know what evidence points towards, like, the Ark. Like, was a boat found? Was there, how did they repopulate the earth? Kind of those sorts of questions.
Actually, there are historians that point to Noah's Ark, and ancient historians that say that there were people who had found it and knew that it actually existed. But that's ancient historians. What I want you to see, though, is when you have all of these fossil beds, they say these fossil beds were laid down when we had this asteroid crash in the Yucatan Peninsula, for instance. Now, this asteroid was massive, and they admit that there would have been worldwide tsunamis. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, during the Younger Dryas, you have a time period where you have a huge glacial melt, and what you have are these ice plugs that are holding back the water in the Black Sea, over Russia, over China, over the United States. You have these huge ice plugs. This isn't conjecture. This is something we know happened, and we have the evidence for.
So what is the evidence? Like, because the whole world flooded. That's just kind of what I'm just trying to get it in my head. Like, so the whole world did flood.
So
or was it a huge chunk of the world?
Yeah, well, it was obviously. See, if you have, all right, here's what you have. You have evidence telling you that within the last 250,000 years, and then other evidence telling you within the last 9,000 to 40,000 years ago, the dinosaurs were killed out. Then when you look at the timelines and you look at the world history and what we know from this world history, the only time that could possibly fit would be the Younger Dryas area, about 12,500 years ago. And about 12,500 years ago is when we did have all of this massive glacial melt with these ice plugs that suddenly all gave way roughly the same time over Russia, China, North America, and etc., pretty much worldwide. And at that very same time, the water, the sea level raised 400 feet. Suddenly, boom, 400 feet, the sea level rose. Now, out west, we have what we call the scablands. The scablands show this particular emptying out into what is known as the Pacific Ocean now. But during the same time, we would have had the massive floods in the floodplains that are all over the world. Because these dinosaur bones can't be that old. They had to have formed in this same time. Now, when you take most people don't realize this. A lot of dinosaur bones are found in limestone. Limestone is a marine formation. Limestone is made up of tiny little crushed cells and marine vertebrae. Shells, vertebrae, bones, skeletons, all marine, tiny crushed up, that creates limestone. And dinosaurs were quickly covered in this material and with silt, sandstone, from a flood. Like, for instance, when you look at the Morrison Formation, they will admit, well, these animals were washed together in a massive flood. Other places all over the world, individually, they'll say, yes, this occurred. They were washed together from a massive flood. But individually, they'll say, but there wasn't a worldwide flood. But I'm sorry, when you have all of these floodplains flooding and during the same event, that's a worldwide flood, no matter how you try to say it isn't. So, when you have that one event, you have the catastrophe of the impact, and then you have volcanic activity going off all over the world, and you have tsunamis washing across the globe on a single continent. Yeah, that's a worldwide flood. You didn't have the high mountains that you have today. You had a single continent. So there's tons of evidence for that. Now, we also have the fact of life itself. We started off on this subject.
Like, how did life come on Earth? How did people appear?
Yeah. Well,
how did that happen?
You've got two choices, okay? Now, the scriptures tell us two things regarding the proof that we have. It tells us, first of all, that God has lit the heart of every person that comes into the world. And it tells us, secondly, that nature itself teaches us that there is a God, there is a life giver, and we're without excuse. We should be able to look at nature and know this. Now, you've got to understand that's coming at a time when observation was pure. There wasn't a horse in the race that says there is no God, and nothing you believe can point toward a God. But that's the way it is nowadays. See, so what you have, Connor McLeod, anytime you would like to come on here, you let me know, buddy. If you got anything better, buddy, I'll bring you on. No worries. You can talk all the garbage you want, Mr. McLeod. Anytime you want to come on, I'll bring you on, and you can prove me wrong. If you've got anything to prove me wrong, I'll bring you on right now. But anyway, what he says, Kirsten, is that we can look at nature in Romans chapter 1, and we can tell that there's a God. Are you with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you look at nature, what does nature show us? We have before us the two possibilities for life on Earth. One, we can say life just randomly evolved, and for some unknown reason that we still don't know the reason for it, it just popped to life. It just randomly evolved, and for some unknown reason we can't recreate it. It just popped to life. Now, do we see any instance of that in nature?
What, that it pops to life?
Yeah, life randomly forming and just popping to life.
Is that not kind of what creation is? Like, how did it get here?
No, that's not.
So how, but like,
that's not at all about creation. Well, what I'm asking you is, we have two choices before us, and I'm just asking you. Okay, the first choice is abiogenesis. Now, here's what abiogenesis states. Do you agree with me that a cell is often likened to a machine?
Is what, sorry?
A cell, a common cell, is often likened to a machine. Do you agree with that?
Like a machine, yeah.
Okay. because every cell carries out functions. So you have a machine. The human body is referred to as a machine in biology books. Common cells are referred to as machines. So you have these machines, and then you have the software for these machines that we call DNA. You with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. So do we what we see is that these machines, if abiogenesis is true, then machines self-assembled. And while they were self-assembling, their software self-assembled within them at the same time. They had the capability of allowing them to perform every function they were capable of perfectly. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, do we see that happening in real life ever?
What do you mean? Like,
Do you ever see a cell self-forming and writing its own software as it is randomly falling together and just popping to life? Do you ever see that occur in nature?
I would say so. Like everything. Well, what do you mean though? From nothing?
No. Do you ever see an instance? Well, the answer is no. You never see. Not only do you never see it, not only do you never see a cell self-forming and writing its own DNA, its own software, and then just popping to life. Not only do you never see that in nature, they can't make it happen in a laboratory. So do you understand what abiogenesis is, though?
Yeah, but my question was like, how did people come to be on this earth, like via creation? Like that's my like big question.
Okay, well,
how did people?
I'm trying to answer that for you logically. So let's look at this first of all. What does life teach us? What does biogenesis, which is a real science, by the way, what does biogenesis teach us?
Well, that's a hard question because it teaches us a lot.
No.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's not.
Biogenesis, I can pull it up again. Biogenesis teaches us that all life comes from life. You can't have, life does not just self-assemble. Life does not just randomly self-assemble and pop to life. Every life that you can point to came from a previous life. I don't care if it's bacteria. You have bacteria that they divide through mitosis to create new life. But still, you had the original life that it divided from. And then you have insects, you have mammals, you have the animal life. And that comes from a previous life, an egg or a live birth, for instance. Okay? And nowhere can you point to any single life on Earth, any example of life, and say this just randomly formed along with its software to run it perfectly. So you have the machine and the DNA that runs it. Nowhere do we see this randomly forming and just popping to life. Nowhere. There's not a single instance. Now, that's why the scripture tells us we can look at nature and understand there has to be a God. Okay, so if nature itself teaches you that life comes from life, then we have to understand in the big question being, did a non-living, non-intelligent, non-conscious particle just blow up into the universe that you see now? And did it create life, intelligence, and consciousness? having never known life, intelligence, or consciousness. That's a rather ridiculous answer.
But they have found microbes and all sorts on other planets. How do you explain that? Does God control the whole universe? Did he make the whole universe? Or is
Well,
it
of course.
just Earth?
Of
So
course
he did create the whole universe.
Of course. Now, that's the common sense answer. The common sense answers tells us that life creates life. Intelligence creates intelligence. Consciousness creates consciousness. Have you ever seen it work out any other way?
What? Life?
Yeah. Have you ever?
Life?
Non-life.
Well, no, because I've not been around. I mean,
well, you have to admit.
Long enough to. Well, life, but then what do you distinguish as life?
Life.
Cells.
Life. So
there's cells. Life.
Cells are living. Yeah, living cells. Yeah, they live. They perform operations. They have DNA. They perform functions. Okay.
Yeah.
You have single cell life. Now, how did single cell life suddenly give birth to a male and a female? There's no such thing in single cell life as a male and female. How did single cell life evolve into males and females? That's something else you never see. Not only do you never see life evolving by itself and falling together randomly and just popping to life, you also never see single cell life popping off a male and a female. So how did birth ever come about? How did that sort of life begin? Now, Craig Venter is another line of science that you can take that just says evolution as it's taught never happened. And guess what? He's an atheist. Okay? But he's the he's the foremost geneticist in the entire world. And he says that there is no tree of life of common descent. Now, the tree of life, what's the tree of life of common descent? That's a staple of evolution that says, okay, we began as a single cell organism, and then eventually there was a single cell organism that became ancestor to every life form that we have today. Craig Venter said, no, that couldn't have happened. DNA proves that's wrong. And he's the foremost geneticist in the world. Craig Venter was the one, he was the man that mapped the human genome before teams of government and corporate scientists could. Craig Venter has the distinguishment of being the only man in the world to have ever written his own DNA code on his computer and extracted the DNA of an E. coli bacteria cell, put his own created DNA into it, and watched it divide and multiply. He's the only man in the world to ever do that. And he's the one that says there is no tree of life of common descent. So evolution as you know it couldn't have happened. Evolution as you've been taught couldn't have happened.
So how did creation happen? Like, what were the first life forms to create other life forms? Like, is it like, no, I could be wrong. Again, I've not read the Bible. I don't know much about it. But what Adam and Eve, are they the people that began on this earth?
Well, the scripture tells us that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, it goes on to say that life that was on earth came to an end. It was destroyed and decimated and laid to waste. We see an extinction event. And then God begins to heal the earth, heal the atmosphere, and restore life on earth. And he begins restoring life in the sea. And
so there was life before life. If I'm just trying to get my
there
there
was
life before life.
there
Is
was
that what you're
another.
kind of saying?
Yeah, if you take the literal Hebrew of Genesis chapter 1, it says that God created this world. He created it with life, and then this world was destroyed and laid to waste, much like science shows us has happened many times. And this is exactly what the scriptures teach. That it came to an end, and then God eventually brought us to this cycle of life and began to recreate life again, starting in the sea.
Starting in starting in the sea. How do you? Sorry, can you explain that for me? Because I don't get what you mean by like
Yeah,
starting in the sea.
yeah. He began with letting sea life rebound, and then you had the rebounding of plant life, and then you had the
Mm-hmm.
rebounding of insect and animal life, and then you finally had man.
And how did man create? Well, how did he create man?
Well, he certainly says we were created rather than evolved. Uh, we were created from the dust of the ground, and from to the dust of the ground will return. And when we take account of what we are made of, we see that's true. We were made from the same thing that we find in the earth, and that's what we return to. We return to the earth.
So, like, please don't take offense or anything from this, but are you not saying that they came from nothing? Like, I know you're saying the dust of the ground, but what does that mean? Like, how were they created? Like,
They were simply formed from the ground and then breathed life into him. And I'm going to tell you something too. You hear a lot of stories from the evolutionists. Well, for one thing, Craig Venter says evolution can't happen the way you've been taught. For another thing, Mary says you don't have time for evolution. The C14 tells you you don't have time for evolution. 234,000 years and less does not give you time to evolve from a common ancestor with a chimp. You don't have that time.
yeah.
So, um, so these you see, these are your choices. Though you have a choice to believe the people that are telling you that this is where you came from. Life just randomly formed when you don't observe that ever happening. The laboratory can't make it happen. Then they tell you it came down, you evolved through millions and hundreds of millions of years. You don't have that time, according to science. Now, not according to me, but according to 3 different lines of science. You don't have that time. So I'll tell you something else. They have to keep changing their story. For instance, when I was a child and went to school, they began teaching me that we evolved from the Neanderthal. He was a forerunner of mankind. He was an early man. And then as I grew older, they had to change that. And they said, no, Neanderthal is your cousin. And now that's where they stand. Neanderthal is your cousin. Denisovan
Yeah, well, I mean,
is your cousin.
That's kind of the proof of science. That's not the proof, sorry. That's the kind of the point of science is to keep learning and then keep.
Well, here's the point.
I like to prove scientists love to prove each other wrong. So they're going to keep researching and you're going to find more things out and they're going to be like, actually, this person was wrong, but this is actually how it really was. Yes. So, I mean, of course, there's going to be a bit of difference in the years because obviously there have been more discoveries. So, I mean, that's what I'm just saying for like explaining that bit is.
So, what do you buy that?
You know,
do you believe that? Pardon? Do you believe that we are the cousin to the Neanderthal?
Yeah, I mean,
that's the current teaching.
Yeah, I mean, this is my belief, and it's because I like to look at the evidence and everything else. And this is like a reason I came on here is because I don't know the other side, like what creation
Okay.
is, what the Bible says. And my
And
biggest question was like, how did people appear on the earth and life appear on the earth?
do you,
That's
do
my
you,
biggest question. Like I'm not trying to say God's not real and I don't
I
believe in this.
understand.
This
So
is me simply getting the other side to the story, if
do
that makes
you,
sense.
do you believe that that's where science leaves us now, is that Neanderthal is cousin to Homo sapien?
For now, I
Okay.
mean, science is always adapting and changing.
Now, let me show you
And
where you've been lied to. Okay.
okay,
And this is so easily provable. Do you know the definition of the word species?
yeah,
Okay. How would you define it?
a species is a type of thing.
Okay, what's that
I
now? I'm
mean,
sorry.
a species is a type of.
Okay, well, a species, the way it's defined in the biological definition of a species, is like organisms that are capable of interbreeding and producing fertile offspring, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay,
I wasn't that specific. It's just a
yeah,
type of was just like my easy
yeah.
kind of.
Well,
Yeah.
this is why the definition is important. So, if a biological species are like animals that are
Mm-hmm.
capable of interbreeding and producing fertile offspring, then we know
Mm-hmm.
we're not cousins to the Neanderthal and the Denisovan. We know we are the same species.
Yeah.
Science proves through DNA that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and with Denisovans, and then Neanderthals and Denisovans interbred with one another.
Mm-hmm.
We all three interbred together. Our descendants interbred with one another. That means that we are not cousins. You see, you're being lied to, and you're holding on to the belief that we are cousins simply because they haven't stopped to point this out to you. The biological definition of species proves that we are the same species because the DNA, and you look this up yourself, Google it for yourself. We have just look up Google interbreed Homo sapien Neanderthal and Homo sapien Denisovan and Denisovan Neanderthal. You'll see we all interbred. We are all the same species, and yet they still want to pretend they're lying to you. They still want to pretend that there are cousins to give the illusion of evolution where there is no evolution. Now, you see, I love science. And so I can't let this sort of crap stand. I have to be honest. I have to say, look, yes, there is an agenda here to keep people ignorant and to keep them confused and to keep them from understanding that they're wrong. They're teaching you wrongly. Why are they
Why
teaching?
do you
I don't know.
why do you think that they're teaching people wrong things?
I
Like,
imagine.
what would be the purpose of that?
I imagine they have several purposes, but each, mostly the people that write our textbooks and have been in this for decades have a dog in the race. Their entire reputation is on the line. If they had to come out and admit that these things are true, then everything that they present to you is on shaky ground. Then, for instance, you probably have not heard that Craig Venter has denied the tree of life of common descent, and being the foremost geneticist in the world, that's an important thing.
Mm.
You haven't heard that the definition of species and the fact that we have the DNA from Neanderthal, Denisovan, and Homo sapien proves that you've been lied to. And they're not our cousins, and yet they're not correcting the textbooks. They're not telling you that what you knew, what you think you know, is wrong. Okay? So, but you can prove, there's not a person in the audience there that can prove I'm wrong. Not a single one. So let them talk crap. That's fine with me. They can talk crap all the day long. The one thing they cannot do, is prove that I'm wrong about anything I've told you. Not one thing.
We've got the same DNA as pretty much every living being.
What's that?
Like, we've got the same DNA as most living beings.
No, that's what what's his name? Richard Dawkins tried to squawk when Craig Venter said that there is no tree of life of common descent, and Richard Dawkins is wrong. Richard Dawkins is not a notable scientist of any renown. He's not accomplished anything great in his scientific career. The only things he has done to gain renown is he's written some books that are anti-theist. His hate against God and anything Christian. And
has he come out to say that he hates Christians?
Oh yes, I can pull up a rally where he's telling tens of thousands of atheists, mock them, ridicule them in public, that we deserve their disdain. He's a hater. Okay, that's what he has accomplished in life. And anytime you're governed by hate and bias, you are no longer a scientist. Now, Craig Venter, he is an atheist as far as I know, but he doesn't hate on people for being religious. And he comes right out and he tells the truth. DNA proves that there is no tree of life of common descent. When Dawkins says, well, surely all DNA on life is identical, he says, no, it is not. And he's very clear. I can give you that. Let you see that for yourself. Now, that's the world's foremost geneticist telling you this.
Yeah, well, with the DNA being the same, the sequence is different, but the makeup is the same. I mean, has that been disproven, or do you agree with that?
Well, all life on Earth has genes, is made up of genes, and has DNA. But the DNA proves that it doesn't all come in a line of common descent. That's what I'm saying. There is no tree of life of common descent, and the DNA proves that. And that's what Craig Venter states. So, see, you have all these lines of science. Now, you have to ask yourself, your choice. Okay, if you don't want to believe in God, that's okay. I don't degrade you or down you for anything. But I will say, you have two choices in what you're going to believe. One goes against every observation you make. The other one doesn't. The other one is in line. Now, do you know very much about quantum physics?
Oh, I can't say that I know much of it. It's complex.
Okay.
Like, I don't even think the professionals know much about it. It's just very complex.
How about the history of our current most popular model of the universe that scientists hold to? Do you know much about its history?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you a condensed history of the universe. Okay. Well, of course, we started off a long time ago with the Big Bang. And that was the idea that something pinpoint the size of a particle suddenly expanded and gave us what we have today.
And you don't think that, though? The creation's different. Am I correct in that?
Well, I'm not saying it couldn't happen that way. As a matter of fact, God says in the book of Psalms and Isaiah and etc., I flung out the stars. I flung out the stars. Now, that sounds very similar to a Big Bang to me. I don't know. But,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, because it's something kind of, well, not,
yeah,
I wouldn't say nothing, but I mean everything's something,
yeah.
matter, and
So,
but yeah.
yeah, so we have that statement 3,500 years before the Big Bang that God says, he didn't just create things in place. He says, I flung out the stars. So, anyway, first you begin with the Big Bang, but there were two things that falsified the Big Bang, and a lot of people don't realize this. But what they were two problems, and Deckstein says I'm cherry picking information. The one thing I'm not doing is cherry picking. I give it all,
I did
Deckstein.
did Dick
Anything,
say that?
anything you think you can prove me wrong on, buddy, prove me wrong. I'll bring you on anytime you want. So, at any rate,
What did Dick Stone say that you're cherry picking?
I have no idea, but I'm not. I'm
Oh,
giving you the
no.
total.
I'm here to listen. To
Mhm.
your side, creation side,
Yeah, I'm giving you
that I
the
don't know anything about.
I'm giving you the total of science and things that you don't hear, things that are being withheld from you. For instance, the definition of species and the fact that we are the same species, biologically speaking, as Neanderthal and Denisovan. The fact that Mary says, this is science. Those bones can't be over 234,000 years old. And the fact that Craig Venter says there is no tree of life of common descent, and DNA proves that. I'm giving you the side of science they keep from you, but you can verify every word I'm saying. Now, with the universe, though, the two things that were falsifying the Big Bang are problems, and you can Google this: horizon and flatness. They observe that the universe seems to be flat, and horizon is the fine tuning that allows.
You're not going to say you're a flat earther now, are you?
No, the
Okay.
the universe appears to be flat, not the Earth.
Yes, because a lot of flat earthers use the Bible as proof
No,
that the Earth is flat.
no, this is scientific, and this has nothing to do with the Earth. This is the universe itself.
Okay,
The universe,
I'm just asking
yeah,
because
like
that's how others interpret that.
right. The galaxies, for instance, are in the shape of a disk, not a ball, but a disk, and they believe that the universe, when they try to observe the universe appears to be a disk, not a ball. It's not round like a ball, but they believe it's a flat disk. So I thought these were things that everybody knew, but you see, there's a lot of things that apparently not. But these are very simple. These are the basic constructs of the entire mathematics and the entire history of the universe, of this particular model of the universe. So they say that what they can observe, the universe appears to be flat, and that they don't understand the fine tuning, because if anything was off in the very slightest, this universe would have expanded away into nothing already, or it would have collapsed back into itself already. But that hasn't happened. So they say that these two things have been a problem for the Big Bang ever since the inception of the Big Bang.
Who
And
says that? Sorry, you say they.
everybody that's ever studied it, Hubble, for instance, all the major top astrophysicists. Now, there's a fellow named Dr. Alan Guth. If you pull up Dr. Alan Guth's paper from 1980, he is what we call the father of, what was it? Expansion. He called it chaotic inflation and something else, eternal inflation and chaotic inflation. But it's called inflationary theory. And he came out with this in 1980. And you can look at his paper, and he says, I came here, I'm writing this paper as a possible explanation to explain the flatness that we observe in the universe. And this flatness can be explained if suddenly we had a superheated expansion that was faster than the speed of light. And then all of a sudden the brakes were put on for some unknown reason, allowing the expansion to slow down, but to keep expanding, but to allow it to cool down. And when it began to cool down, it collapsed into a disk. That's the basis of his paper on inflation. That's probably how why it doesn't look like a ball, but it looks like a disk. But in his very first paragraph of his abstract, he ends it by saying, and as beautiful as this idea is, however, it doesn't work out mathematically. Mathematically, it leads to consequences that are just impossible. And so this idea needs further work. Now, there were a lot of people that were excited about that paper. Mm-hmm. And they were excited to the point that some other theoretical theorists, some other scientists jumped on board with him, and they then took the next 2 years to wrap that entire idea in string theory. So you take the Big Bang plus eternal inflation and then wrap it all in string theory, and that's what they came out with in 1983. Now, at that point, there was a big uproar. Why was there a big uproar? Because you had one group of scientists that were all excited because suddenly this opens the door to a multiverse, this idea of bubble universes and a multiverse and every type of universe you can imagine. On the other hand, you had the real scientists that believe in falsification, and they said, this isn't even science. This is pure imagination. There's no way to even put the stuff to the test.
Yeah.
So
that was what I was saying before, is scientists like to prove each other wrong, and that's why science advances.
Unfortunately, science hasn't advanced because they have embraced what can't be falsified and called that science.
Like, so, what do you mean?
Well, what I mean is that's still what they fund, even though they couldn't test this directly. You can't test all this string theory and stuff, the Big Bang directly. You can't. And so they settled for trying to make predictions and to test the predictions rather than test the hypothesis. Since you can't test the hypothesis directly, they chose supersymmetry, what they call supersymmetry. And from 2013 through 2015, they tried 5 different times at CERN to test supersymmetry, and it failed every single time. So not only can you not test these hypotheses, even testing your predictions, they failed at CERN. And yet they still hold it up. They didn't trash it. They didn't say, okay, well, we got to come up with a new idea, even though I can show you articles from 2013, 14, and 15, all saying we have to come up with something new because that failed. So then what they did to
Eric,
try to...
apparently Connor wants to join the conversation.
Well, I don't care. I'll let Connor come in at another time. Connor, you set up a time when you want to come on with me and prove anything wrong that I've said. I will set up that time with you. This is a conversation that is not going to turn into a dumpster fire. So, anyway, at that point, what they tried to do, rather than come up with, you see, the common sense thing to do would have been to scrap the whole thing, come up with something new, but that's not what they did. Now they're trying to fix everything by coming up with what they call dark matter and dark energy. Now, what do you know about dark matter and dark energy?
What do I know? Not an expert. It's very complex.
Well, what do you know anything about it?
Not again. It's quite a complex thing. So no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I admit when things are complex and.
Okay, it's not all that complex. It's not all that complex. What they've done, they say, okay, we fix this all now. Everything works out. And here's how it works out. We have spotted a force in the universe. And this force is omnipresent. It is everywhere. There's no place in the universe that this force does not exist. We observe this force. We observe that it is holding the galaxies together. It is holding the solar systems together. This is the force that they call dark matter and dark energy. And this force is expanding the universe while it's holding all of creation together. Now, the interesting thing is they say they observe this force. They don't know what it is. That's why they call it dark matter and dark energy. They haven't got a clue what it is. They just observe the force. The interesting thing is every one of its attributes are an attribute of the Christian God. For instance, they say it's omnipresent. A dark energy is omnipresent. Type it up, Google it yourself. Type in omnipresent and dark energy, and you're going to see dozens of papers come up where they talk about dark energy being omnipresent. It's everywhere. There's no place it doesn't exist. It says that dark energy, dark matter, flows through everything that exists. It flows through all matter. It flows through you. It flows through me. The scriptures tell us that God is flowing in all and through all that exists. It says that they say that dark matter is what's holding the galaxies and everything, all of creation together. It keeps it from flying apart because of the atomic weight and the rate of spin. They should have flown apart a long time ago, as well as the solar systems. But it's this extra gravity that they spot from somewhere. They don't know where it's coming from or why it's happening, but they measure it and it's there. They observe it, and they say it's holding all of creation together. The scriptures say God is holding all of creation together. It says that dark energy is expanding the universe as we speak. But 3,500 years before they knew anything about dark energy, the scripture said God, in the Psalms and in Isaiah, several places, it says that God is expanding the universe like a curtain. Now, if you look at how a curtain expands, that's exactly the way they say this universe is expanding. So,
do you know how he makes it expand?
He doesn't tell us
how he holds.
He doesn't tell us how he does. He just says he does. The important thing here is everything that they say they observe regarding dark energy and dark matter is an attribute of God written in the King James Version of the Bible. It is something that was written about God, an attribute of God, 3,500 years before they even suspected dark matter and dark energy doing any of this. The
Because
important thing
people have
is,
claimed they've spoken to God, haven't they? Do
well,
you? Am I
sure,
right in that?
sure.
Do you believe that?
Well, of course, I believe that. God has spoken to
I,
me, and you can either think I'm a liar or insane or what have you.
I'm not. I'm not saying
Right.
that at all.
Right.
I'm honestly. I'm just getting.
Yeah.
I'm just learning.
Yeah. See, God, I can tell you something that really happened. I gave my testimony, as a matter of fact, and put it on record on the last YouTube channel I had, and I did it on this one just yesterday or day before. But you see, I was from the time I was a little kid, God has dealt with me personally. And some of the things that God did was when I was 2 years old, I was healed of leukemia. I was diagnosed with
Oh,
leukemia.
wow. Wow. Sorry to hear that. That's quite a.
Well, yeah, I should have died, but I didn't. I didn't.
Yeah.
When I was 6 years old, I gave my life to the Lord. I asked the Lord to save me of my sins at the age of 6. And I prayed to God, and I knew God literally. I knew He was there when I spoke to Him. And my family, you have to understand something about my family. I saw both sides. My mom was a Christian, but my dad was a full-blown pagan, demon worshiper. I saw things in my household that you see movies about, and I kid you not. But I saw both sides of that power, the good and the bad. And I played.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, why do you think He saved you but not others, like not other children that have leukemia? And
I had I don't know. I had many people praying for me. I know that. And
it was just a curious question because I know
yeah,
that
I don't get
I
all
was
of my
just
prayers.
wondering.
I don't get all of my prayers answered, and I look at that as God has His reasons. But I do know this: when I was 6 years old, after I had given my heart to the Lord, we got a telephone call, and we lived in Norfolk, Virginia at the time. We had to make that trip to Norfolk, Virginia, from Norfolk, Virginia to Ohio. And when we got there, I saw my grandfather. This was back in the days where they sent you home to die from the hospital. My grandfather was sent home to die. He had been in a car accident. There were a total of 6 people in the car, including my grandfather. They were hit by a train. And yeah, all of them were killed instantly except for my grandfather and one other fella. And the other fella died in the hospital before my grandfather was released to go home to die. They had no hope for my grandfather. He was in a coma. He had serious critical internal bleeding and injuries going on, and he should have died. My grandfather was the most godly example I ever had in life, and I loved my grandfather more than anybody in the world. And I went outside crying. I was 6 years old, and I asked God, please don't let my grandfather die. And my father, who was a pagan, came out and he heard my prayer and he says, God's not going to let your grandfather die. And my grandfather didn't just make it, but God gave me 30 extra years with my grandfather.
Wow.
And then when I was 12 years old, I was pushed off of a moving truck and impaled. And I literally died on the operating table. And
my goodness, sorry. That was,
yeah,
oh gosh.
I was literally brought back and spared. And when so I've seen all these wonderful moves of God and all these wonderful works of God in my life. When I was 21 years old, I had walked away from God. And I'd walked away from his fellowship. And the reason for that was I was confused. You see, I had gone from children's Bible stories to wanting to understand the Bible for myself. And I had a lot of questions. And I've been to a lot of churches. And every minister I talked to, I asked these questions. And every single one had... Have you ever looked somebody in the eye and you could just tell they were BSing you? They were just trying to...
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's how I felt. And I felt like I knew more about the Bible than most of the people I was talking to there, and that was a shame. So, I guess in frustration, I kind of walked away from the Lord. Well, then something happened. God brought me back to him in a miraculous way. When I was 21 years old, I was out of the army and had a girlfriend. We were doing this and that. And my brother and I, we were into all kinds of stuff, dirt biking, martial arts, anything that was rough. We loved it. And we had been dirt biking for weeks. And then all of a sudden, tell your friends, I don't care what they think. But
what do you mean?
When
they say stuff in the chat, sorry.
Yeah, well, when we had gathered back into my place, I lived above a bar at the time. My relatives owned the bar. It's called the Wagon Wheel Bar in Wilmington, Ohio. And my relatives practically ran the place. It was one of those redneck bars the police wouldn't even go into at the time. And while we were up there, we were playing around martial arts games, and my brother broke my hand. And this happened in front of 5 other people. There was myself, my brother, our best friend, and our girlfriends. And all of a sudden, everybody was looking at my broken hand. It was broken right between the wrist and the knuckle, with the bone from the middle finger and the ring finger, right in the middle of the bones. They weren't a dislocation. They were breaks. And my brother was mentioning that I had to go to the hospital to get that set. But I knew something was happening to me, and I didn't know what. And I extended my hand, and I tried to flex my hand. Now, when you try to flex your hand, and it's broken, you can't flex your hand. It's just impossible. But the more I tried, the more I was able to. And then all of a sudden, my bones literally popped back into place. You could hear the pops. You could see the bones pop back together. And after they popped together, everybody was amazed because we're all 6 watching this. I kept opening and closing my hand tighter and tighter, and the bruise and the swelling and everything melted away right in front of all of us. Now, you can call BS if you like, but this is what happened. And I would be a liar if I said this did not happen. But it was at that precise point God spoke to me literally, and I'm the only one that heard it. Nobody else heard it. And God said, if you don't give me glory for this, you're going to die. A lot of people might take that as a threat, but it turned out not to be a threat. It was a warning. At any rate, Satan wanted me to take the glory for that, as though that was something I did through some mystical power of my own. And
so
my
you
brother,
believe in Satan?
oh, I know Satan exists. I know
Because I've
demons.
heard that a lot of
Yeah.
Christianity, they don't believe in Satan or hell or anything.
I know demons exist. Like I said, my father was a pagan. My mother was a Christian. I've seen both sides. I've seen the things that happen that are in only seen in movies. I've seen them happen in my own home.
Like, are you talking about like exorcisms and things, or are you just?
I'm talking about things that should never happen. Demonic things that should never happen. And God's protection through it all. But I'll say this, when God spoke to me that time and said, if you don't give me glory, you're going to die, my brother immediately asked me, look, can you heal the spurs on my knees? He couldn't do his high kicks anymore because of spurs on his knees, and he wanted me to heal his knees. I couldn't take glory for what just happened to me. I didn't do it. God did it. And I told him what you just saw had nothing to do with me. That was the power of God. Now, 4 of these people are still alive today. This happened decades ago, and they'll tell you it happened. They're still saved. We all turned our hearts over to the Lord that day, renewed ourselves, rededicated ourselves. And it was weeks later that I told my brother right then, though, I told him, what you saw had nothing to do with me. That was the power of God. Well, then, weeks later, my wife and I, we were thumbing to Hollywood, California. We had decided this weeks before. But in the meantime, I had sent everybody home, and I prayed. I said, Lord, you've got my attention. I don't know why you're choosing to bring me back. I wouldn't want me if I were you. But whatever your reason is, I'm sorry that I've left your fellowship. I've been so confused. I didn't know what to believe, but I want you to teach me your word. I want to understand your word, and I want you to teach me. I don't want to have to fall under some man that's going to lead me wrong. And from that day...
would you say... Oh, sorry.
Well, from that day forward, God began teaching me his word. But in the meantime, we left for California. And when we got to California, or on the way to California, we got down to Shreveport, Louisiana, record time. And then the trucker we were with hollered over a CB looking for a ride west. And he caught us a ride going west Highway 10 toward California. It would have had to go through Texas and etc. So we went with him. And when we pulled out of the truck stop with this trucker, there was somebody following him in another truck. So at that point, we just made small talk until we got into Texas, outside of Nacogdoches, Texas. Not too far, he pulled a gun. He was going to rape my wife and kill us both, literally. And this turned out to be a serial rapist, murderer who is dead now.
Wait, who was it?
I'll pull him up for you in a little bit here and show you. But at any rate, when he tried to scare us, he pulled the gun on us. My wife was immediately scared, and she started crying. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel afraid because I remembered what God had warned me. And I remembered my action. God told me if I didn't give him glory for the healing of my hand, I would die. But I gave God glory that day, and I knew we would live. And I told my wife, don't be afraid. He can't hurt you. He can't touch us. And I told him to his face. He's the dude holding the gun. He looked so confused, he didn't know how to act. Said, you're not going to touch her. You're not going to hurt either one of us. And I don't have to lift a finger to stop you. God will stop you. And after a little bit, he kept trying to scare my wife. She wouldn't scare anymore. And she told him she's had to go to the bathroom. She said, you better pull over or I'm going to put my DNA all over your truck. And so he pulls over, turns off his truck. He made her get out on his side, walked her around to the driver's side, made me open the door, and told her to get between the tractor and the trailer and do her business. And she did. I could tell when she dropped her drawers and stooped because his eyes followed her all the way down. And if you're a man into the things I was into, you know things like that. You follow their eyes. So I followed his eyes down as she stooped. And then when I moved slightly, he pointed the gun back up at me and told me, don't you even think about it. And I told him, dude, I don't have to think about anything. I was laughing. I said, God's going to stop you. I don't have to lift a finger. And when I said that, Kirsten, you can believe it or not, but this is what happened. He froze like a statue. He was about to say something. He was moving his arms slightly, but it was still extended, holding out his gun. His eyes were slightly bulged and not blinking a bit. His mouth was held open. His arm didn't move an inch. And I don't know how long he stood like that, frozen. It was over a minute. But it was so long, I didn't even pay attention. My wife was standing in the gravel between the tractor and the trailer. And she had taken off running, and I had no idea that she had taken off. So when he finally come to, he was shaking his head and just amazed. I was amazed. He started shaking his head. He didn't know what had happened. He didn't know what had gone on. All he knew was that he was coming to and Debbie was gone. Not to be seen. And she had run so far up the highway that he couldn't see her anyway. She was way up the road trying to flag down traffic. So at that point, he made me get out of the truck and he started saying, oh, well, I wasn't really going to do anything. I was just kidding around. I didn't mean none of it. And I was laughing. And I even followed him around to the driver's side of the truck. And he must have thought I was going to attack him. He turned around, he put the gun in my stomach, and I told him, dude, I told you weren't going to touch her. And I was going to have to lift a finger to stop you. God stopped you. And if you don't repent, you're going to die. And the man is dead today. But that really happened. We still have a police report in Nacogdoches, Texas. Debbie had pulled somebody over. They took us to Nacogdoches, Texas, where we made a police report. They never did find him there. But he was brought to justice later. And after killing a few more people, unfortunately. But that is still on file, police record. So that really happened. God is real, God does.
What about all of the pain and suffering? Like, this is one of my other big questions: is there is a lot of pain and suffering in the world?
Well, we all suffer.
Why?
We all suffer. We all suffer because we gave this world over to Satan. And look at the people around you. Look at the people right now that can't prove me wrong on a thing that I've said in the comment section. They can't prove one thing wrong, but all they do is mock and ridicule and hate. You see, it's that kind of hatred right there.
There have been some interesting questions, though.
I'm not saying there's not interesting questions. I'm just saying, look, though. See, they can't prove a single thing I said wrong. Not one thing. I've invited him on several times. Jordan has had several opportunities to try to prove me wrong on anything. Connor has had several opportunities to try to prove me wrong on anything. They can't prove a single thing I've said wrong. But they can make fun, act like children. And you see, I think you're above this, Kirsten. I think you are a better person than this. I don't think you're a mocker. You may have serious questions, and that's fine. I've been cool with you. You know, I haven't been snide with you. But I will.
No, I know. I'm the firm believer I treat people how I want to be treated, and if I show you respect, then
amen.
You show me respect. That's me.
And that's good. But unfortunately, your friends aren't like that. You're a better class of person, Kirsten. And whether I can convince you there's a God or not, if I can just make you think that possibly there is and search out the question, I'm happy. But I will ask you to search these things out because, number one, your choices are clear. And observation teaches you that what you're taught couldn't have happened. It doesn't even make sense. None of this makes sense. It's all proven wrong. You can look and prove that only life brings forth life. And if the original thing in the universe was an eternal energy, an eternal living energy, which is what I submit, then this is consistent with all sciences. It's consistent with the double slit experiment in quantum physics, which teaches us that matter as we see it doesn't exist as matter as we think we know it until it's being observed. The double slit experiment teaches us that if matter is unobserved, it doesn't act like a particle. It acts like energy. So that means that the basis of everything, if quantum physics, if what we're teaching is true in quantum physics, then energy is the core, the basis of everything. And the material is the thing that's going to drop off. It's the illusion. The real life is the energy. The real life, the real consciousness, the real Kirsten is an energy. That's your consciousness that's never going to die. Energy can't be created. It can't be destroyed. That's one of the pillars of science. So if you are a consciousness, the real you, and your consciousness is an energy, and Horsethorn, you don't know the first thing about the double slit experiment. Get off it, dude. You guys can't teach anything I'm wrong. Can't show me wrong on anything I've said to this girl. Because I have no horse in this race. I'm telling her the truth. So, you see, if quantum physics is true, and the basis of everything is energy, that's the core, the real everything that exists, then the core of you, the real everything of you, is energy that's never going to die. That means you are an eternal soul. And that life could have only come about through another life. It didn't just randomly form and pop to life.
Well, no, that was my mum and dad.
Well, you know, we were given birth to, but the original life didn't just randomly form together and pop to life. We don't observe it in nature. We can't make it happen in the lab. They can take all of the building blocks to life and put them all together. And no matter what they do to it, it just lays there. They can't make it pop to life. Every way they've ever tried has failed.
How come and again, not discrediting anything you say, if there is a God, how come he doesn't like show it or prove it or like
He does. He proves it all the time, every single day. Every time we watch bacteria multiply, every time we watch an egg hatch, every time we watch something give birth, we see it came from a prior life. That's proof right there. No matter what they try to do, they can't make abiogenesis work. They can't create life. You know, a lot of atheists, as a matter of fact, they got all excited when Craig Venter designed his own DNA on his own computer, and he extracted the DNA of an E. coli bacteria cell, and he injected the man-made DNA into it. Number one, that didn't randomly happen. That was designed by a man. Number two, he took material that was already living, an E. coli bacteria cell. He didn't create a cell from scratch. But all kinds of people tried to say, Craig Venter created life from scratch. Well, you can look it up. He had to go on the BBC and set them straight. And he literally says, no, I did not create life from the scratch. And he didn't. He can't. Nobody has ever been able to. So these are facts.
What I was meaning, like, is more like obvious, like I'm here kind of things, because like a lot of people don't pay attention to science and that sort of thing. So I just wondered why he doesn't, like, you know, I don't know, some way of saying I'm here.
I think he already has. Like I said, you know, the scriptures tell us we can look at nature and tell everything about God, including the eternal Godhead and his glory. Now, first of all, like I said, look at every life. Common sense tells you life doesn't just randomly form and pop to life. It had to come from a previous life. So that means the first life on earth had to come from a previous life that existed before it. That can only be a God. And then you have science telling you that they observe a force in the universe that is omnipresent, that is omnipotent over the entire universe, that is stretching it out, expanding it, and at the same time holding it all together. It's invisible, and yet they see this force, for lack of a better word, they call it dark matter and dark energy. They have no idea what it is, but they know it's a force. And every one of these attributes are attributes of God that were written down in that book 3,500 years before today. So we have all of these evidences. We have all of these proofs. And what does your side have? Nothing but things that are proven false and proven untrue. Like saying Denisovan and Neanderthal were your ancestors or your cousins. No, they're not. They're the same species. Science proves that. They say, okay, well, we descended. We split off from a common ancestor with the ape so many millions of years ago. Well, no, that couldn't have happened because you don't even have 234,000 years, according to Mary Schweitzer. According to science, you don't even have 234,000 years to evolve from a common ancestor. They're trying to say a whale evolved from a dog-sized land mammal called the Pangaea. It don't have 200. It only has 234,000 years to do that at the very most. That didn't happen. Not in 234,000. So science is teaching you that what you believe is wrong. And science is teaching you that God is the only conclusion. God has to be the answer to all of this. God is that previous life. God is that omnipresent force in the universe that's expanding the universe and holding it all together at the same time and causing life to form, bringing forth life. That's what God does. God is life. God is love. And God lets us make our own way through life. God lets us make up our own mind. What are we going to believe? So, all I would like to get across to you, Kirsten, is that of all people in this world, you have different types of people. Some people do live by blind faith, and that's the evolutionist. That's the atheist. They live by blind faith. They believe that all of this stuff happened the way you're told it happened in school, despite the fact that science has falsified everything that you believe. So, no, Duckstain, I'm saying science is right, and you are wrong. And there's nothing you can do to prove a word that I've said wrong. So what I'm going to do, Kirsten, we've been on there for like 2.5 hours. And I want to thank you because you really are a wonderful guest. I want to thank you for that.
You.
I'll try not to put you on the spot with too many things. And
that's all right.
I've honestly tried to answer your questions, and I will be open to bring you on. I will be happy to do it again anytime you like. And
thank you for it.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I want to issue a challenge because I want you to see what I'm telling you is true. I'm going to challenge any one of your friends to set up a date and a time with me this week or next week to come on with me live to prove anything that I've said wrong with science. Anything. I don't care what they pick. And if they can prove me wrong, then okay, I'm proven wrong. I'd be man enough to admit it. But if they can't prove me wrong, I think that gives you even more to think about, Kirsten. And I care. I really do care, and I mean that sincerely with all my heart. I'd like for you to see and come to know the things that I see and I've come to know, because I believe you'll be a happier person. And I just don't lump you in with the kind of people that I see in Nemesis, and I want you to know that I think a whole lot better of you than that. So, do me a favor, though. Would you like to come back on another time and maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would you like to take a few minutes and give a few parting words?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I've learned quite a bit, and I'm sure that I've got a lot more to learn. Yeah, because like I said, I grew up an atheist, so I mean, I literally know nothing about the Bible bar some common stories. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. It really is. And anytime you feel you want to come back on, you stay in touch with me. meeting and just give me a time and date.
Okay.
And
you.
anything you'd like to ask further, just feel free. We'll take it anywhere you want to go with it, okay?
All right, thank you. And thank you, Dick, Stain, and Connor.
Thank you all. God
Thank
bless you all. And I mean this. In the meantime, while Kirsten is trying to figure out when she wants to come on next, I challenge anybody in this audience right now to come on first and prove me wrong on anything. Anything. I'll give you the same opportunity I gave to Kirsten. So God bless you all. God bless all my friends, all my non-friends, all my haters. Believe it or not, I love you all. And this is Eric, a.k.a. Wolfpin. This is Hot Topics. And thank you, Kirsten, so very much, and I'll see you next time.
All right. See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. God bless.